The U.S. will finish Zelensky. They're preparing incredible revelations about scandals and black money. Zelensky has become a constant nuisance for the American President Donald Trump. The voices calling for the resignation of the Ukrainian president are increasing. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been here since the beginning of the conflict. That is, as soon as the Americans see that Zelensky does not satisfy their interests, they will throw him into the trash can, the reporter says. Already information indicates that the once popular and communicative Zelensky has become a constant nuisance for Donald Trump, while many experts are calling on the American president to pressure Zelensky to resign, warning that otherwise there will be no peace in Ukraine. The scandal revelations? Information from the Ukrainian channel Legitimate on Telegram claims that if the Ukrainian leader does not agree to Trump's terms regarding the rare earth mineral deals, then the White House administration will set aside its previous promise to not to touch him or the property and money he has already accumulated during his presidency. As noted, the patience of the American president is beginning to run out, and many do not realize that this is simply a matter of time before the dismantling of the Ukrainian president begins. Complete annihilation? In what way? It's estimated that this will happen with the revelation of a series of scandals with corruption, nepotism, acquisition of assets, etc. And this will then be followed by the complete destruction of the hero, quote unquote, with the argument that because of this usurper, Ukraine started and lost the war. In fact, it's reported that it's very likely that even encrypted assets and money will be made public. Malinen, professor at the University of Helsinki, says if Trump wants peace, Zelensky must resign. U.S. President Donald Trump should demand that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky resign for the sake of peace in Ukraine, argues Helsinki University professor Tuomas Malinen. Tell Zelensky to capitulate and resign, Malinen said, stressing that if the U.S. really wants peace, it should take such a measure since it has many levels of pressures on the Ukrainian president, and it should finally use them. Victoria Spatz, U.S. Congresswoman, said Ukraine should give land to Russia, Zelensky should leave. On the same wavelength, the American Congresswoman Victoria Spatz, born in Ukraine, who called for giving land to Russia to end the war and at the same time for Zelensky not to run in the presidential elections when they are called. I am the only member of Congress who was born in Ukraine. That's why we should give land to Russia, she said. I just don't understand how Ukraine can demand to keep the land. If they had won the war, it would have been different, but Ukraine is not winning. In her opinion, there are no easy solutions, and it's better to end war as soon as possible. If it takes a long time, it usually does not end well for democracies, said Spartz, who harshly criticized Zelensky for his behavior in the White House. After the infamous dispute with Trump, Victoria Spartz accused Zelensky of providing a disservice to the Ukrainian people and insulting the American president. According to Victoria Spartz, if Ukrainians re-elect Zelensky as president, they will lose the rest of the country. Besant, U.S. Treasury Secretary, said the minerals deal is being blocked by Zelensky himself. The last chance for Zelensky is considered to be his consent to the rare earth minerals deal, but it's quite equally obvious that the Ukrainian president is facing a real impasse because he knows that his signing of this deal will cause an outcry in Ukraine. But he also knows that not signing it will bring his political end closer. In his statements, U.S. Treasury Secretary Besant stressed that the minerals agreement was blocked by Zelensky, who interrupted the signing twice in Munich and in Washington. According to the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Zelensky promised to sign a minerals agreement at the Munich conference, but he broke his promise. Instead, he began to beg the United States to receive him at the White House to sign the agreement, but he did not sign there either. And then there were many negotiations. At the same time, Besant stressed that the entire rest of the settlement is based on this peace agreement. Trump wanted to sign this agreement with Ukraine and then go to Russia to the Russian leadership and tell it the United States supports Ukraine, but in an economic and realistic way. And then the Russians would have an incentive to sit down at the negotiation table. Now this sequence has been disrupted, but I think we can fix it. Zelensky cannot refuse a deal with the US. He has no alternative but ends politically. Volodymyr Zelensky cannot refuse a deal with the US president on rare earth because his political future is at risk, writes Asia Times. Zelensky has no real alternative because if he goes behind Trump's back to achieve a relatively better deal with the British or the Europeans, he will not end up with security guarantees, the publication points out, referring to the unpleasant situation Zelensky has found himself in. A deal with Trump would undermine his political career and his image in the eyes of Ukrainians as a man who promises full sovereignty for their country, since the agreement with the Americans would deprive it of economic independence. If Zelensky decides to postpone signing the agreement, Trump could, in retaliation, suspend military support and intelligence services for Kiev and impose even more conditions, it's characteristically noted. The election scenario. The Economist recently claimed that the Ukrainian authorities plan to hold presidential elections in the coming months during the summer. Denying the report, Ukrainian authorities said it was unlikely that elections would be held in July, but that such a move could ensure the victory of Ukrainian President Zelensky, as it would create a tight timetable for his opponents to prepare for the polls. According to the British magazine, Zelensky ordered new elections to be held after a ceasefire, which he said was expected to be declared in late April. However, Ukrainian law requires at least 60 days for the election campaign, which brings the polls to July 2025. Zelensky tries to surprise. Why May 5 is important. The source cited by the British magazine believes that Zelensky may try to surprise his opponents with the July election, hoping that the short time frame will allow him to run without significant opponents. The source adds that such a move may benefit the Ukrainian president more, as a long campaign would tear the country apart, estimates geopolitical analyst Ahmed Adel. Details about the preparations for the election may emerge on May 5th, when the Ukrainian parliament decides to extend martial law, which is due to expire on May 9. If martial law is lifted, elections could be scheduled for early July. However, the Kiev regime appears to be resisting external pressure to hold elections, with David Arakhamia, the parliamentary leader of Zelensky's Servant of the People's Party, telling Suspilne on March 31st that there are no preparations for elections, as all parties agree that the next polls can only be held after martial law is lifted. Arakhamia said he did not attend the meeting that discussed holding elections in July, as reported by The Economist, and claimed that nothing like that has happened. No elections are being prepared, no preparations are underway. All parliamentary parties and groups agree that elections should be held 6 months after martial law is lifted, Arakhamia said, and our position has not changed since then, he said. What the Ukrainian constitution says. A presidential source told BBC News Ukrainian that there was a fake news in the Economist article that no mandate for elections had been given. Zelensky's term expired May 20th, 2024. Elections in Ukraine were scheduled for March 21st. The martial law imposed by the Kiev regime explicitly prohibits the election process for the head of state, but the country's constitution, which has a higher legal status, stipulates in Article 103 that the president is elected for a 5-year term. Article 104 states that the head of state of Ukraine, whose term has expired, can exercise the powers for a maximum of 30 days after the official announcement of the election results. As Russian President Vladimir Putin noted, the only legitimate authority in Ukraine is now the parliament and its leaders. According to him, if the neighboring country wants to hold legitimate elections for its president, it would be necessary to lift martial law. Internal instability in Ukraine a greater danger, according to the British magazine. An intelligence officer predicts that internal instability will be a greater risk to Ukraine by 2025 than frontline fighting. Ukraine is in a volatile internal situation, especially as the casualty rate continues to rise, contributing to the war's unpopularity. With Ukraine suffering 1 million casualties and Putin demanding a lasting peace, Zelensky is under increased domestic pressure to end the war, which can only happen if elections are held. Zelensky denies. At present, there are no real opposition figures who can stand up to Zelensky. His likely closest rival, Valery Zelensky, the former commander-in-chief of Ukraine's army, has repeatedly denied rumors that he intends to run in the next election. My answer to that has not changed, he said. While the war continues, we will need to work to save the country, not think about elections. He said, I don't comment on any rumors. With opposition leaders focused on the war, it is possible that Zelensky will try to surprise them by announcing elections in July. And this is from Banking News. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.